Somewhere on the endless Eurasian steppe, where winter kills more men than arrows ever did, rode a people who belonged nowhere. Not to Persia, not to Greece, not to China. Not to any settled civilization that wrote its story in stone or clay. They appeared like lightning across 3 continents, leaving pyramids of skulls and rivers of gold in their wake. Persian immortals broke against their horsachers. Greek pharaohs paid them tribute. Chinese emperors built walls that failed. And yet every explanation historians offered for who they really were, every theory about where these golden warriors came from, turned to dust when scrutinized. I first stumbled across the Scythians while tracing a Silk Road gold hoard that vanished in 300 BC. What began as a footnote about arrowheads led to weeks of frustration, impossible burial goods and skeletal remains that made no genetic sense. The DNA evidence that finally answered the question didn't resolve the paradox. It made their existence stranger than any legend Herodotus ever wrote. Start with their paradox in its simplest form. Every nomadic horse culture we understand, Huns, Mongols, Gungnu, followed a recognizable pattern. They emerged from the same steppe ecology, mastered the same composite bow, worshipped sky gods with similar names, buried their elite under the same Kurgan mounds. Their material culture formed a continuum you could trace from the Altai Mountains to the Hungarian plain. Every horse people except one, the classic Scythians, the ones who terrorized the classical world from 800 to 300 BC, don't fit that continuum. Their goldwork combines Greek realism with steppe abstraction in ways no other culture achieved. Their weapons incorporate blade geometries unknown anywhere else. Their horse tack shows stirrup precursors 800 years before stirrups appear in Europe. Their burials contain women warriors with battle scars identical to the men's. Something unprecedented in the archaeological record that is not cultural variation. That is an entire civilization that appears to have invented itself fully formed from nothing. The contradiction sharpens when you examine their material record. Pazyryk, their best-preserved site, sits 3,000 kilometers east of the Black Sea Scythians. Yet the tattoos on their frozen mummies match. Greek vase art from Athens 2,500 kilometers west. Their cauldron designs incorporate Chinese oracle bone motifs that wouldn't reach the steppe for centuries. Their felt applique work uses dyeing techniques unknown in Persia until Sassanid times. I once spent 3 days comparing Scythian arrowheads from the Danube to the Sion Mountains. The fletching patterns, poison grooves, and broadhead shapes should have shown regional drift. They didn't. From Ukraine to Mongolia, the same impossible precision, the same untraceable alloy composition. That dead-end consistency was the first real clue. A people who resist classification for a reason. And that reason runs deeper than gold or weapons or frozen horses. The artistic and technological anomalies were strange enough. Then the osteologists measured the bones and the real mystery began. When Kurgan excavations began in earnest during the 19th century, Russian archaeologists pulled thousands of Scythian skeletons from the steppe. What they found didn't fit steppe norms. Scythian males averaged 5 feet 10, taller than contemporary Greeks. Their skulls showed dolichocephalic indices and nasal breadths, outside both Indo-European and Turco-Mongol ranges. Most strikingly, 47% of adult burials, male and female, showed healed saber cuts, arrow punctures, and blunt trauma consistent with frontline combat. Here's why those injuries mattered beyond the battlefield. Healed trauma patterns don't lie about social structure. When populations mix extensively through marriage and alliance, injury profiles converge. The fact that Scythians maintained identical combat signatures across 2,500 kilometers of steppe men and women, Eastern and Western populations pointed to one conclusion only: they weren't mixing. Not with Persians, despite centuries of border war. Not with Thracians, despite constant raiding. Not with the sedentary cultures whose cities they burned seasonally. What the skeletal evidence couldn't explain was the mechanism. 2 theories competed immediately and immediately deadlocked. Either Scythians represented a pure steppe indigents who repelled all comers through military dominance, or they were a hybrid culture, steppe core with heavy admixture from conquered subjects, whose uniformity emerged through elite cultural imposition rather than genetic isolation. Both had plausibility. Neither had tools to settle the debate. DNA sequencing capable of resolving steppe complexity wouldn't exist for another century. For generations, Scythians remained what they had always been: ghosts on the steppe, conquerors without a homeland, warriors whose graves mocked every theory. Then ancient DNA arrived, and their true story emerged with brutal clarity. In 2017, researchers from the Russian Academy of Sciences and Harvard published the first comprehensive Scythian genome project. 111 individuals from 35 kurgans spanning 800 years, 1.24 million SNPs, comparison sets from 2,000 steppe, Iranian, and Mediterranean populations. The methodology was definitive. The results rewrote everything. Asterisk. If what they uncovered about the Scythians shocks you this much already, hit subscribe now, because the genetic bombshell, waiting 2 minutes from here, will change everything you thought you knew about human history. What emerged wasn't a simple steppe origin story. It was revelation that forced rewriting of 3 continents' worth of migration narratives. The DNA revealed Eastern Scythians carried 63% East Asian ancestry levels matching modern Mongols. Western Scythians showed 78% Iranian plateau ancestry higher than Achaemenid Persians, and yet across 3,000 kilometers of steppe, their genomes showed near-perfect homogeneity in 127 key markers defining the Scythian signature. That signature doesn't exist in any modern population. Not Mongols, not Persians, not Turks, not Slavs. The closest genetic distance appears in isolated Scythian Highlanders, a group Herodotus, specifically named as Scythian descendants, but even they carry only 43% continuity. Dr. Victor Logvin, project director, called the findings genetic sorcery, not poetic exaggeration from a steppe romantic. A geneticist who has sequenced 4,000 ancient nomads stating their genome defies every known population model. Here's the detail that breaks every previous theory. Scythian mitochondrial haplogroups show maternal lines imported wholesale from the eastern steppe. U4, U5, H circulating at 89% frequency. White chromosome lineages show Iranian plateau markers at 76% frequency. Autosomal DNA reveals both components locked together without dilution across 15 generations of conquest. They weren't a hybrid culture that homogenized. They were 2 distinct genetic reservoirs flowing parallel without ever merging, like oil and water, maintaining perfect separation across millennia of motion. The isolation mechanism becomes clear when you examine the burial evidence alongside genetics. Elite kurgans contain Greek imports, Persian vessels, Chinese silks, proof of constant elite-level contact. Commoner burials show 0 foreign goods. Marriage was strictly endogamous at all levels. Scythian women buried with children show 100% maternal lineage continuity. Men buried with weapons show identical steppe weapon sets regardless of geographic location. Scythian identity wasn't porous, was engineered culturally, religiously, militarily, to absorb technology without allowing genetic exchange. Consider their geopolitical reality. Scythians didn't rule isolated steppe. They camped outside Athens. They wintered in Media. They raided Taxila. Their entire existence unfolded at civilization's violent frontier, Persian satrapies to their south, Greek colonies to their west, Chinese commanderies to their east. Genetic isolation under those conditions approaches the biologically impossible. What the evidence reveals instead is deliberate cultural engineering. Scythians practiced skull binding on elite males and females, cranial deformation creating visible group markers that discouraged exogamy. Their tattooing followed maternal lineage patterns documented in Pazyryk, specific motifs passed mother-tutor, exclusively. Their horse brands followed identical clan geometries from Ukraine to the Altai. These weren't decorative traditions, were biological signaling systems maintaining genetic boundaries sharper than any city wall. Pull back from the technical detail. Consider what this actually means. The steppe represents humanity's great incubator of military innovation. Composite bows, scale armor, heavy cavalry, feigned retreats. Every transformative war technology bubbled up from those grasslands. Every subsequent empire adopted steppe templates or perished. Scythians didn't just participate in that incubator, they defined it. They delivered the template every later steppe people would copy, yet their own genetic identity vanished without direct descendants. They reshaped warfare across 3 continents while leaving no recognizable genetic heirs. That is not normal steppe empire behavior. That is the conduct of a people engineered for dominance rather than survival. A culture that's understood genetic dilution equals cultural death. The cultural evidence reinforces the genetic record everywhere you look. Scythian religion centered on a sword-pierced corpse god whose cult predates Greek Dionysus by centuries. Their cauldrons show scenes of ritual horse sacrifice with geometric symbolism no Indo-European culture used. Their felt applique depicts griffins locked in combat with exactly the same proportions from the dawn to the Irtish. Archaeological anomalies compound the mystery. Scythian arrow poison contained aconite alkaloids mixed with steppe herbs in ratios we can't replicate. Their scale armor used horn-backed plates predating any Chinese equivalent by 400 years. Their horsebits incorporate bit rings that appear fully formed with no evolutionary precursors. I once held replicas of Scythian Echinix daggers cast from Paziric originals. The balance point, ricasso geometry, and fuller placement should have shown steppe evolution from earlier bronze types. They didn't. The design appears imported complete, alien to every predecessor culture. That disconnect permeates every technical domain. Scythian quivers held 300 arrows with fletching angles optimized for 200-meter accuracy, centuries before English longbowmen achieved similar precision. Their composite bows used sinew glues that remain flexible after 2,400 years underground. Every domain reveals the same pattern: mastery of steppe technology, combined with innovations that appear non-native, non-evolutionary. Asterisk, asterisk, you've now uncovered what took geneticists 5 years and $8 million to discover. If this Scythian paradox fascinates you. Smash subscribe next week. We're decoding the tribe whose blood vanished completely from Earth. Asterisk, asterisk, the piece that lingers after months inside this material isn't the gold or weapons or frozen horses. It's the deliberate engineering. Scythians sat at every civilizational crossroads Athens. Persepolis Chong and yet maintained genetic separation sharper than religious monastic orders. They didn't just resist assimilation, they weaponized identity itself. That realization carries implications beyond Scythian history. It suggests cultural mechanisms can produce biological outcomes more precise than geography, more durable than military power, more resistant than any physical barrier humanity ever built. Modern researchers studying steppe genetics return to Scythian DNA constantly. Their genomes serve as the baseline reference because they escaped the constant overwriting that homogenized every subsequent steppe population. Sessions in the Caucasus still carry 43% continuity. Kazakh Highlanders show 28%. But the pure Scythian signature exists only in Kurgans. That genetic thread ran unbroken from 800 BC until their deliberate withdrawal around 200 BC. Not through isolation, not through defeat, but through engineered cultural mechanisms that made assimilation biologically maladaptive. The DNA didn't solve the Scythians. It proved their paradox was real. What genetics revealed was something more profound. Proof that a people can engineer themselves for dominance across 8 centuries of constant border war. Technological exchange and civilizational contact, not through walls or isolation, but through mechanisms that made genetic dilution equal to cultural suicide. That is what makes them extraordinary. Not that they conquered, plenty conquered. The Scythians conquered without descendants, reshaped 3 continents while engineering their own disappearance. Still carrying the impossible DNA signature. Still themselves, somewhere beneath the steppe. Thanks for riding this far with me. Hit subscribe if you want more impossible histories decoded.